In 1776, while the American colonists were signing their Declaration of Independence, a Scottish professor was publishing a book that would change the world in a completely different way. He wasn't talking about political freedom. He was talking about pins. Yes, pins. Those small metal objects you use to hold fabric together. And with that seemingly trivial story, Adam Smith launched an idea so powerful that we're still debating it 250 years later. The idea was simple. Nobody needs to organize the economy from the top. Nobody needs to tell the baker to make bread, or the shoemaker to make shoes. Each person, pursuing their own interest, ends up contributing to the well-being of everyone else. As if an invisible hand were guiding the whole thing. Is it true? Is it false? Is it more complicated than it sounds? Let's find out. Welcome to Season 5 of Everything Has a Price. In the 4 previous seasons we've come a long way. We started with wheat and shoes, discovered how money was born, understood how banks work, and explored interest, debt, and inflation. Now we enter the heart of economics. This season is about markets. About supply and demand. About how prices are formed. About why some markets work beautifully and others fail spectacularly. And we start at the beginning. With the man who, in a sense, invented economics as a discipline. Adam Smith wasn't an economist. That profession didn't exist yet. He was a moral philosopher, a professor at the University of Glasgow, and his first major book was called The Theory of Moral Sentiments. It was about empathy, justice, why human beings care about each other. It's important that you know this, because the popular image of Smith is completely distorted. He's presented as the apostle of selfishness, the father of unbridled capitalism, the man who said greed is good. He said nothing of the sort. What Smith observed was something far more subtle. And he explained it with a pin factory. Smith visited a workshop where 10 workers made pins. Each one handled a specific task. One drew the wire. Another straightened it. A third cut it. A fourth sharpened the point. And so on through 18 distinct operations. The result? 10 people produced 48,000 pins a day. If each worker had tried to make complete pins on their own, they might have made 20. Perhaps not even one. The difference didn't come from working harder. It came from the division of labor. Each person specialized in one task and became extraordinarily efficient at it. Remember what we saw in Season 1, specialization multiplies production. Smith had identified this 250 years ago. But he went further. He asked something nobody had asked before. Who organizes all of this? Think about it for a moment. In a city like Smith's Glasgow, thousands of people need bread every morning. And every morning, the baker is there, with his loaves ready. Nobody orders the baker to wake up early. No government department calculates how many loaves Glasgow needs. No planner decides how much flour to buy. The baker makes bread because he wants to earn a living. It's his self-interest that gets him up at 4 in the morning. Smith put it in a phrase that has become one of the most quoted in the history of economics. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. Notice what he says, and especially what he doesn't say. He doesn't say selfishness is a virtue. He doesn't say we should be selfish. What he says is that the system works not in spite of self-interest, but through it. The baker wants to sell bread. To sell bread, he needs to make good bread at a reasonable price. If he makes bad bread, customers go to another baker. If he charges too much, the same thing happens. The baker's self-interest forces him to serve others. Not out of generosity. Out of necessity. This is where the famous invisible hand enters. And this is where we need to be very careful, because the popular story strays quite far from what Smith actually wrote. The expression invisible hand appears exactly 3 times in all of Smith's work. 3 times. In thousands of pages. Once in his History of Astronomy, a youthful text. Once in the Theory of Moral Sentiments. And once in The Wealth of Nations. It wasn't his central concept. It wasn't his grand theory. It was a metaphor, almost in passing, to describe something he found remarkable. When each individual seeks to employ his capital in the most advantageous way for himself, he is led as if by an invisible hand to promote an end that was no part of his intention. The order that emerges from the market is designed by no one. There is no architect. There is no master plan. It's a spontaneous order that arises from millions of individual decisions. This was revolutionary. Because in 1776, the dominant idea was exactly the opposite. To understand why Smith's book was so important, you need to understand what he was arguing against. The dominant economic system in Europe during the 16th, 17th, and much of the 18th centuries is called mercantilism. Its logic was simple. A nation's wealth is measured by its stock of gold and silver. To accumulate gold and silver, you must export more than you import. And to export more, the government must actively intervene. Tariffs on imports. Subsidies for exports. Monopolies granted to companies friendly to the king. State control of trade. Mercantilism saw the economy as a zero-sum game. If France wins, Spain loses. If England wins, Holland loses. The world's wealth was a fixed pie, and every nation tried to grab the biggest slice. Smith said this was a fundamental error. Wealth is not a fixed pie. When two countries trade freely, both can benefit. Trade is not a war. It's cooperation. And the government's constant intervention didn't improve things, Smith argued. It distorted them. Tariffs protected inefficient producers. Monopolies eliminated competition. Subsidies directed resources where the government wanted, not where they were most productive. Smith was not an anarchist. He recognized legitimate functions for the state, national defense, the administration of justice, public works that no individual would have an incentive to fund alone. But he believed that, in general, the market allocated resources better than any planner. And here we must be honest about the idea's limits. Smith did not say markets were perfect. In fact, he deeply distrusted businessmen. He wrote that people of the same trade seldom meet together, even for merriment and diversion, but the conversation ends in a conspiracy against the public or in some contrivance to raise prices. Smith was not naive. He knew that businessmen seek monopolies, secret agreements, unfair advantages. And he believed the government should prevent it. Nor did he say that self-interest was the only human motivation. His other great book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, begins with this sentence: however selfish man may be supposed, there are evidently some principles in his nature which interest him in the fortune of others. Smith believed in empathy. He believed human beings have an innate capacity to put ourselves in someone else's shoes. His vision of the economy was not a world of ruthless egoists. It was a world where self-interest, channeled by competition, could produce socially beneficial outcomes. The difference is enormous. And it's been lost in 250 years of oversimplification. Since Smith, economics has split along lines that are still recognizable today. There are economists who inherited Smith's trust in markets and took it further. The Austrian school, with Hayek and Mises, argued that any state intervention distorts prices and reduces efficiency. The Chicago school, with Milton Friedman, insisted that free markets are the best-known mechanism for allocating resources. And there are economists who pointed out market failures. Markets don't work well when there are monopolies. They don't work well when a transaction affects third parties who didn't participate. They don't work well when information is asymmetric, when the seller knows something the buyer doesn't. John Maynard Keynes argued that markets can get stuck in bad equilibria for years, with millions out of work, and that the government must intervene to pull them out. We won't settle this debate today. Or this season. Or in the whole series. Because the debate isn't settled. The most serious economists in the world still disagree about how much market and how much state produces the best results. What we can do is understand the mechanisms. And that starts here, with the most basic idea of all, how a price is formed. The invisible hand isn't just a theory. It's something you experience every day without realizing it. When a storm hits and oranges become scarce, their price rises. When tomatoes are in season and there's plenty, their price falls. Nobody decides these changes. They happen on their own, as the result of millions of decisions by farmers, truckers, supermarkets, and consumers. But the invisible hand has limits that affect real people. If the market decides that manufacturing drugs for rare diseases isn't profitable, those drugs don't get made. If the market decides that housing in a thriving city is worth a fortune, entire families are priced out. The market is extraordinarily efficient at producing what people can pay for. It's not as good at producing what people need but can't afford. That tension between efficiency and equity sits at the center of nearly every economic debate in the world. And we'll see it throughout this season. 3 ideas to take away from this episode. First, Adam Smith observed that specialization and the division of labor multiply production. And that self-interest, channeled by competition, can coordinate an economy without central planning. That's the invisible hand. Second, Smith was not a market fundamentalist. He distrusted monopolies, recognized legitimate functions of the state, and believed in human empathy. The caricature of Smith as someone who only defends selfishness is false. Third, since Smith, economists have debated how much market and how much state produces the best results. That debate remains open and we'll explore it throughout the entire series. Smith showed that self-interest can create order. But he left a puzzle unsolved. If markets are so good at setting prices, why do we value diamonds, which we don't need at all, more than water, without which we die? That puzzle went unanswered for nearly a century. Until three men, working separately and unknown to each other, solved it almost at the same time. That's next time.